Hello and welcome. I'm Victoria. Recently, it was asked of me to do a list of my top favorite books about human trafficking. If you don't know what human trafficking is, because there are a lot of misconceptions about it, it is when someone is coerced or forced, bribed in some form or fashion to do something against their will. If it has to do with maybe labor trafficking, where they're forced to do some sort of task where they don't get much pay, or maybe they get no pay. A lot of times people think that you have to be chained, and there is so much more to it. There is sex trafficking, labor trafficking. There are those that do get kidnapped, but though I need to tell you guys, only about 1% of human trafficking victims are actually kidnapped. Usually there is someone that they know or someone that they trust that they get pulled into something against their wills. So while doing this video, you're going to see examples of that. There are a lot of books. I've read way over 100 books on this topic since 2007 when I found out about human trafficking. It is one of my very favorite things to learn about. It is my passion. I believe I am pretty well educated in it. I'm still reading books as they come out. I will say it is harder to find books on human trafficking today than it was when I started researching it, which is really sad. It's like a lot of people don't really care as deeply as they used to. And it has grown and increased where about 50 million people worldwide are put through different trafficking situations. If you have any questions about it, please ask me. There's just so much information and understanding of this that sometimes you have to have like a really deep conversation to really fully grasp it. And even then you can't really grasp it. So in compiling this list, this is only the top favorites. These are books that I have rated 4 or 5 stars. And because it spans so many years of me reading these books, there are a lot. But I hope that you guys will want to read at least one of these. Please read at least one that sounds interesting to you. If not, all of them. I know a lot of people aren't into autobiographies or biographies or even informational type of books, but I feel that they're so important to be able to learn about what people are able to endure and different crimes or what people get away with and how justice needs to be served. It is very important to me that we seek justice for the oppressed, that we bring an end to slavery, an end to human trafficking worldwide. And if you want to know ways that you could do that, also contact me about that. I will give you so many ways that you can combat it in small ways. I'm going to start with A Long Way Gone. This is a memoir of a boy soldier. This is about a boy named Ishmael. There was a conflict in the area of Sierra Leone where a lot of children were forced into a war against their will, where there have been soldiers that have gone in there and they take the child and force them to bring violence upon their villages, the people they're related to, the people around them. And if they don't, they will die. So it is really one of the most horrific forms of human trafficking, and it makes me very sad to read these accounts. This book, though, is really, it's aimed for a YA type of audience, so there's not so much violence. My 17-year-old son has also read this book, and he really enjoyed it too. This is about a boy who actually is trying to run away from the war because he had been forced into it, but he wants out. He doesn't like all that's happening, and he tries to go as a refugee from country to country, trying to get out and away from it, but it has spread through different countries of Africa. This is an account of something that happened in the 1990s. The author was actually brought to the US as a refugee in 1998. I need to actually read more of his books. I've only read this one, but he is someone that is a member of the Human Rights Watch Division for Children's Rights, and he has spoken to the United Nations and many other people about the issues of war crimes and what's done to children. Teresa Flores, I have met her, but I read her first book before I met her, and I did briefly have a conversation with her. Now, she does what is called SOAP, Save Our Adolescents Against Prostitution or something. I forget exactly what it stands for, but it's every year she puts together this program where you bring soaps to hotels they have in rooms, so that way women that are forced into sex trafficking can see the messages and try to get out. And it has definitely helped a lot of people. So there are task forces that go to these places, and I went to one of them at one point, so it was really eye-opening. But Teresa Flores, the reason why she does this is because She was put through sex trafficking when she was 15. She gives her story. Now, the original book that I read has loads of sexual content in it. She is very, very raw, and it was called Sacred Bath. And that is what I read when I was pregnant with my second child. But when I talked to her and I told her I read that, she's like, oh, you read the really rough one. She's like, I fixed it up to be not as intense in The Slave Across the Street. So I have not read The Slave Across the Street, but she said it's the same story, but with less details. So that way it could be a little bit better for people that are like, I don't need this information. So she was trafficked in the 1970s. It was really heartbreaking to read her story, but I was so sucked into it. I read The Sacred Bath in a day. I was so into her story. But The Slave Across the Street is what I recommend to you guys to read. Gary Haugen, I have read all of his books. He is the president of the International Justice Mission who created that. He had been a lawyer originally, and his life was completely turned around when he went to Rwanda and saw the genocide, the remains of it. So I'm going to give you a list of the most amazing books that he has written. Out of them, like my top favorites of his books. So Just Courage, this one is what puts our faith into action. This one is so encouraging. It makes me want to do stuff. This is an incredible book. This is filled with scripture. It's filled with God's love. This is one that any Christian that wants to fight human trafficking should read all of his books. But this one definitely, I think, will move most people, especially if you want to do something about everything. Also, Good News About Injustice. This is my favorite of his books. This was the first one I read back in 2007. This talks about what got him into the fight. This also is filled with scriptures. I just love it. And then I'll tell you about Terrify No More. This is more about the investigations, what goes on behind the scenes, how they're able to rescue people from different forms of slavery, from labor trafficking to all of the different types. And International Justice Mission does the greatest and most insane legal work. And a lot of people that have worked to try to rescue people have died. I highly suggest these 3 books especially. There are other books he's written, but these are the top 3 of his books. Sold, this is such a good book. This is probably going to be a little bit difficult for some people to read. And this is a banned book, which makes me so mad because I feel like a lot of people need to read this book. It should not be banned. This is a fictional story, but it's based off of interviews with actual girls that came out of brothels and slave situations in India and Nepal. This book, it is such a fast read because of the spacing and everything. I definitely recommend this one. It's very poetic, but it talks about what a girl goes through while she is living in a brothel, how she is brought there. And I don't remember there being anything intense. It is a YA. And then there is also a movie version, which my organization did a movie showing for this, and it was really great. A lot of people loved it. So if you read this book, also watch the movie for it. There's nothing shown in the movie, by the way. It is one that is just very good. It's very impactful. I feel like if people are just learning about sex slavery, what young girls go through in a lot of Asian countries, this is really a good one to read and watch. The Natashas, this was also, I think this was like the 3rd human trafficking book I had read. It is very informational, but it was so impactful, and I learned a lot about these girls in different countries of Eastern Europe and how they are forced into sex trafficking. And a lot of times their names are changed and just made Natasha, because when you transfer them to different countries, and say you take this Russian girl that had her passport taken from her after she was promised a really great job, and she really needs money for her family, and she's brought to another country to get that money, and because she is Russian, they just automatically make her a Natasha, and that is her name, and now she has this new identity. So this is talking about the slave trade for those who are forced into such atrocities. And it talks about a lot of things that happen for rescue missions and people that maybe had been through it, different places around the world where they went to one country, then another, and how they're just brought from place to place to place. This was written in 2005, so now it's like outdated, but I read it in 2007 and it was just like brand new and so great. And I know other people that loved this book too when it came out. The first book that I had read on this topic was Not for Sale. Also, this is outdated now. The stories throughout this are so amazing. They don't give any explicit stuff, but they get your heart wrenching. And then there's also ways of how we can make a difference and change that. This was the book that actually made me want to read all the other books. So if it weren't for this book, I probably wouldn't have read everything that I've read. It changed my life and my perspective. I Am Nujood, age 10 and divorced. This is heavy duty. So this is a form of labor and sex trafficking where there are little girls that can be sold as brides. This is one that you don't hear often about, but this is about a little girl who was sold to a man. She's Yemeni, like 9 when she was married off, and she was abused quite terribly. And this is her story. And she did get divorced and she did get out of Renting Lacy. This is a book specifically about how the average age of those that are put through sex trafficking and prostitution is 13. Now it is lower now, but at the time it was 13. So we'll just say it's in that young age. This is about their conditioning and what their mind is put through in order to get them to where they are. This does give a fictional story based off of real accounts. And this is from Shared Hope, which is an organization that fights human trafficking. I feel like it gives you a good understanding of what a lot of young girls have gone through in the US specifically. Passport Through Darkness. This is a heavy book, but I loved it so much. And like, I still remember the feel of the book. It had like a texture to it, and it was like kind of silky feeling. This is about a woman who goes to Sudan, and she talks to a lot of women that had been put through sex trafficking after also being child soldiers, and some of them not. And she is doing her best to help them out while conflict still had been going on at the time, to the point where she had been through a horrible and dangerous situation herself. She could understand them in a new way because she went through such traumatic situations. She is honest. She gives her doubts, her fears, and she talks about Jesus and how her faith strengthened her while she was going through everything to try to help these women. Truth Behind the Fantasy of Porn. This was very eye-opening and is very sad, this story. Shelley Lubin, she had been a very well-known porn star back in like the 80s. And she talks about how she was trafficked when she was a young girl and eventually put through prostitution. She was forced to watch pornography and then eventually became someone that was forced to become a prostitute, and then she was forced to be put into pornography. And she gives you the insight of her journey and how she eventually found Jesus out of it all. And it is intense. Her story is raw, and I loved it. She is blunt. She talks about how Jesus was able to heal her and how now she tries to help other people that are in pornography get out. So many of them have the same story she had, even today. And she also has shared about how so many of them end up killing themselves because it's so much pain that they had to endure, and how so many of them were forced into drug use to try to cope with it. So she gives a big spectrum that I think a lot of people don't want to acknowledge. There is bad language and sexual content throughout this book, but she talks about the atrocities and how horrible it is, but she needs to give you a picture, and she states how she needs to give you a picture of how her life was and how horrible it was. So this will be definitely a bit hard for people to read. Slave, My True Story. This is about a woman that had, when she was a young girl, there was a raid in her village and children were taken. And she was put through slavery and eventually became a maid, a live-in maid for a family, and how she was treated by those people while she was in captivity. So this is a labor trafficking story, but it starts off with a sexual slavery story. But she does give a lot of information about what happened to her. And there's some painful stuff. There's stuff about female genital mutilation issues. But she has such kindness and love like throughout this. Like, I loved this book. This is one of my favorite books. This is a top read for me. She does run a foundation now. She is trying to fight for education and water in the Nuba Mountains of Sudan. For Their Tears I Died. This was beautiful. This talks about some slavery in Cambodia, Thailand, the US, Brazil, and Uganda. They're mainly sex trafficking stories, but there are some child soldier stories in this as well. These are true accounts. And there's also something that's talked about where there are these people called ladyboys forced to be transgender, what that looks like for these young men that were forced to become women and sold for sex in Cambodia and Thailand. It is something that you don't really hear about that often in a lot of these books, so this one is unique, but there are so many other stories too. But I wanted to emphasize that there is a unique portion in this book. Throughout this talks about how Jesus cares for the least of these, and that there's healing for a lot of these people, And it's really beautiful how everything is worded and the miraculous stories that came out of this. This one is definitely a fast read because you get sucked into it. Girls Like Us. This was an interesting and really good account. Rachel Lloyd actually was chosen for a Goodreads Choice Award for this book back in 2011. It is really good. It's her story about how she was put through sex trafficking and how eventually she moved from Great Britain to the US to New York City, where she worked with lots of young girls that were put through sex trafficking and how she made a home for them, what it's like to deal with some of the women that come in. She gives stories that they had. Lots of language in this. This one, what I love about this is a lot of times people say that they choose to be prostitutes. And this book, she states like the opposite, saying no one chooses to be a prostitute. And she gives examples of why, based off of her experiences, the people she worked with while in the field, and the people that she is working with therapy for trying to help in her safe home that she runs in New York City, which is like controversial for a lot of people, but it is so dynamic. But again, lots of language in this book, and I wish there weren't. There is also a documentary that I love called Very Young Girls. If you could find access to that, I really recommend it. It's kind of probably hard to find these days. Somebody's Daughter. This is based off of someone that was trafficked, sex trafficking, in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And I had heard about this person and what they went through. I think I might have met the person at one point. I've met different survivors. This gives you insight of what it's like to be forced into that situation, how it happens before it happens. So this mainly goes through the story of this girl and how her trafficker / pimp found her, and how he was really, really difficult to pinpoint because he was just all over the place. And it gives you insight about pimp culture and how it became this popular thing in the 1970s, and how to this day people make jokes and make it seem like it's a cool thing to be a pimp. There's a lot of vulgar, profane talk in this one, though, in this book. And there's a rape case that is explained in detail, so it's not kid-friendly. But I do like the talk about police forces and what they do trying to raid and arrest people that are criminals in sex trafficking. This was really good, except for all the like really vulgar stuff and the language. First They Killed My Father. I loved this book so much. This is a survival story of a woman. When she was only 5, Pol Pot had been with the Khmer Rouge when they would go in, and they started taking teachers, and there's just the killing fields, labor trafficking like crazy, starvation. This is a tale of survival and how her large family were trying their best to make it through this labor trafficking and all the atrocities during the 1970s, and how there was also child soldiers that came out of this as well. Very heavy duty, but very beautifully written, nothing too graphic or intense. There is a sequel book that I read to this, but this one I like way more. The sequel book talks about her life as a refugee in the US. There is a movie version of this book that I actually really liked as well. It's a little slow, but it's like, it shows the depiction of what she had gone through really well. But I definitely love the book more. There are pictures in the book too that show her family and what she looked like, you know, and I really liked her story. Sold. Even though this cover kind of looks a little bit weird when you're like, oh, this looks like an old book even by just looking at it. And that's because it was published in 1994. It is old, but is so worth reading. This is about 2 sisters that grew up in England, and their father sells them as brides to people in Yemen. So they actually had to go from their cozy life in the UK to a completely different lifestyle in mountains that were remote in Yemen, and what it was like for them to go through that. They were only 14 and 16 when they were sold. And they were told that they were going on vacation, by the way. So it is really, really sad. It was powerful to know that this is what happens in a lot of countries to this day, that these young girls are sold to men as brides. Is horrible. I did have some problems with grammar for this book, just so you guys know. Maybe it was just my copy was like, maybe it was an arc or something, but the whole story was really captivating and I loved it. This was a really good book. This is called Forgotten Girls. And when I first saw this book was coming out, and I loved the cover and I just couldn't wait to read it. And it was so good. This is different accounts of young girls that were put through sex trafficking. It deals with physical abuse and rape and poverty, labor trafficking as well, and hardships of families and what they go through that makes them have desperate moments where sometimes they do sell family members to try to help their full family. But throughout this, there are miraculous stories of how God intervened and helped these girls, even though they were going through some of the most awful things. Running for My Life, I love this book, by the way. Lopez Lemong, he was one who lived and grew up in Sudan. There was a civil war that went through, and he ran to try to escape being put through being a child soldier. Eventually, he lived in Kenya as a refugee for like a decade. And then he was just running all the time, like around the camp. It was pretty interesting. And then it got to the point where there were sponsors in the US that decided to bring him over and eventually adopted him even. He loves his family that he has, but he's also got a brother that he is connected to that was also with him. And both of them actually are athletes, but Lopez Lemong was an Olympian. He did not win a medal, but I loved when I saw him in the Olympics and I had known his story. I was like cheering him on because I was so excited for him. And he thanks God for all the things that he gave him to weave his story even through the hardships. Oh, it's so wonderful. This is so inspiring. Everyone should have his attitude. He's always smiling. He's always joyful, even though he went through crazy situations. All right, the Stolen series. This is a Christian series. This is called Stolen Woman. This is about a woman who's growing up in North Carolina. She had been adopted from India, and she decides to go to an orphanage in India to work with the kids there. And she starts to learn about what these children have gone through, and then she puts it to her own story, like, did my parents go through something like this? Did my mom go through this? So she starts to piece together stuff like that. Her name is Asha, and she does meet Ronnie, who is a trafficking victim. She wants to save her really badly. And so it's about her fight, trying her best because she can't just go in and rescue someone. There's a process, and she has to work with the people that work at the orphanage and then people that are trying to help fight sex trafficking in that area. So it was a really good story. And the second book I really loved as well. The third book, not so much, but the second book was really good too, which is called Stolen Child. So, Asha, she wasn't born in India. She's Bangladeshi. So she goes to track to see her own line to try to find out where she came from. So the first one, she's going to help out orphans. She tries to rescue someone. And this one, she's trying to find out her own story. Another series is On the Edge of the World. Scared is the first book. Priceless is the second. I actually really love Scared way more. I read this in a few hours. It was so good. This is about a photographer who has taken, you know how some of the life pictures that were taken long ago, how we find out later, like what the situation was behind the photo? This was kind of based off of one of those situations. So this guy, he's a photographer, finds out that his photo that had like won awards really had a lot of problems behind it. So he goes to Swaziland to try to learn more about the story behind his photo. And it's with him struggling to understand God. So then his question is, why does suffering happen? And he meets this 12-year-old girl who has AIDS, and she has a mother and two siblings. And so he learns about them. And so it's a sad story, but it also is about healing. And there's a lot of stuff about trafficking in this book. Beyond the Shame, Project Rescue is the organization that is behind the making of this book. Because of my organization, they sent me this book when I connected with them, when we were trying to find partners to our organization long ago. And I was really touched by this gift. And it gives perspective of women and girls who are human trafficking victims, but how Jesus heals their pains and how they've found freedom through that. And then in a lot of countries, there is this whole aspect about shame with sex. And so this is saying that they're going beyond the shame to find that healing. Finding Me, Michelle Knight. Now, there was a huge news where there were 3 girls that had gone missing. Michelle Knight, she has, I think, autism, and she had gone missing. So this is her story about how she became a sex slave with these 2 other girls from this one man that kept them hidden and locked up in his home. So it gives you a whole different take. This is like I said, one of the small kidnapping accounts, and she tells her whole story, and it was riveting. It was really sad too, but it was beautiful at the same time because she was a prisoner for 11 years and she was the first to go missing and the one that wasn't really cared about. Like no one in the news really focused on her because she was kind of like the kid that no one really cared for. And she talks about what that was like growing up the way she had grown up. And then when the two other girls went missing, that's when the news was trying to find them a little bit more. But her story's about faith as well. And she says that God spared her life. It is like beautiful when these people go through the most horrific things, but they're like, but you know what? I got through this because of God. I wouldn't be able to survive without that. And how I am at peace because of it. Like, it's amazing. I couldn't put this book down. In Order to Live is about a girl that grew up in North Korea, how there are labor camps and lots of labor trafficking, and there's sex trafficking as well. And she crossed the North Korean border for freedom. And by the way, they call it Chosun, North Korea. So she says that a lot in the book. She was forced into a lot of horrible things after she crossed the border even. There were some hard things in this book. It was really sad. She became part of Youth with a Mission later on, and she gives her testimony. To this day, she gives really great speeches. Like, if you have ever listened to her talk, she is incredible. And she's trying to give us an understanding of what goes on in her country so we can see, like, these people need help. Please help those people that are there. And that goes into The Girl with Seven Names, which I love this book even more. And she talks about her life in North Korea and then crossing the border and all the sex trafficking that she was put through while she was trying to find freedom. It's very detailed and it was so good. She talks about when she got into China, what that was like. And along the way, she had different names that she had been given because she became a sex slave. And that eventually she made it to South Korea to be at peace. So both of those books are so good. Highly recommend reading them if you want to read about what life in North Korea is like and what it's like to try to escape. Because a lot of people go through insane hardships in their country and out of their country trying to find that freedom along the way. Child Victim Soldier is a very short book about the Lord's Resistance Army in the Congo area with Joseph Kony, who had different tactics to try to force these kids into child soldiers. They're really sad stories, but this was really good even though it was short. The Color of the Sky. This is about two girls that form a friendship. They are separated over time. This is a lot about sex trafficking and the Devadasi, which are the girls that are temple prostitutes. They are forced to serve the temple, and that means that men will abuse them over and over again for the sake of a goddess that is worshipped there. And this is all throughout India that these girls go through this. And then there is someone that is born in a brothel in India and wants to meet her family. But there's also someone that's in a higher caste that is treated like a little princess. But she is one of the girls that was the friend, so she's trying to find her friend, and she realizes, wow, there is a whole different life that some people go through, completely different from my easy life. And so this book goes through their timelines. It is really good. Nobody's Girl is very outdated as well. Bad statistics if you were to read this again, but Barbara's story is so good. She had been put through sex trafficking on the streets, thought she was like this empowered prostitute, and she tells her story and you realize that she has a trafficker and she is put through drug abuse. But yeah, she was 12 years old when she was put on the streets. It's really, really sad. And she was sold throughout Washington, D.C. and New York City. So that whole stretch. But she works with great organizations now like Polaris and Artworks for Freedom. And she goes and she speaks and tells her story. The Last Girl. So there's that whole news that came out about the Yazidi situation in Iraq. And Nadia, she is one who is Yazidis. This is like a certain type of Christian group. And she talks about the politics in her country that led to eventually her being forced as a sex slave, as a bride that is forced into that kind of slavery, and how her minority group was targeted specifically and forced in horrific ways to try to cleanse them from their beliefs by having them forced into these marriages. She gives these raw details without actually being sexual, by the way, and what it's like for her to be in her captivity. Very good. Also a great speaker. If you haven't heard her speak, she has been freed since, and she's amazing. Tears of the Desert. I loved this book. This is about Halima, and she talks about her wonderful relationship with her father. He invested in his children so much. And in a country where a lot of girls are looked down upon, he never did that to his daughter. This does talk about female genital mutilation and also about rape. She was very educated for a girl in a country with a group of Arab women and how they're looked down upon for having an education. And the Janjaweed Arab militia went in and attacked the village. They went into one of the schools. 42 of the women were kidnapped, and they were schoolgirls, and they were put through sex trafficking, also sold as brides. But she was so good at telling her story. Like, it is such a beautiful way of writing. So I really liked it. The Girl Who Smiled Bees, this is about the Rwanda genocide. And this girl that travels through 7 different countries to try to find freedom with the conflict that went on because of the genocide, through being put through sex trafficking and labor trafficking, forced soldiers. There's so much PTSD in the people that survived this. What I love is she puts you in the place of a child, and so you can understand what she went through as a child. This is such a good memoir, and this is about how she and her sister were able to survive and how they eventually became refugees in the US. The Sound of Gravel, this is one that is very much different from like all that I just talked about. This is about a Mormon polygamous group, and Ruth was raised in one of those groups, and her childhood, what it was like growing up to have these extra moms, and her father was like a martyr for this group, and how she had to grow up with a stepfather because her family was like sold to him, and about the poverty that she goes through, the neglect. There is a lot of sexual abuse. One that is a little bit graphic that's mentioned, but something that was really different is that this talks about how sometimes in those type of groups, when you have a lot of child labor, they just did so much work as children for hours and hours, and how exhausting it was. And it was just interesting to learn. Her story was really good. Dancing for the Devil, this is about a woman that had been put through sex trafficking and how she had been an exotic dancer, and how that is basically a hub that is for a lot of traffickers to find those women and put them through sex trafficking. She was not graphic about anything in this. Now, she had a father that actually really cared about her and what it was like for her to grow up with a loving father. But she talks about what it was like to be a high-end stripper, put through escort services, and how eventually she got out because of finding Jesus. And she now runs Eve's Angels, which helps women out of the sex industry. And part of that is going into the strip clubs and talking to them and helping them. And by the way that she gets put through trafficking is a very sad and true example of how so many women get through that. And it starts with abuse by someone when you're young, and then what that made her feel inside. There is also stuff about drugs in this book to try to cope with what she went through. But I love how she talks about the grace of God throughout this. It is so good. Amal Unbound. I love this book. This is a middle grade book. It is very safe for people to read this. It is about this one girl's put through bonded labor where she has to pay up through her work. She never really will be able to work as much to pay her off her bond. And that is what so many of these families and these people that are put through labor trafficking go through. And she just lives in a very unfair environment, but she wants to make a difference. And it is just really good. And it's very engaging. So I highly recommend this if you like middle grade books. And if you're wondering where this is located, this is about a village in Pakistan. Under the Naga Tale, this is also a Khmer Rouge Cambodian survival story. Before I read this book, I watched Ghost Mountain, which is a documentary about the author. And I was like, wait, I know this story. As I was reading, I was like, I know this story. And then I was like, oh, it's that documentary, Ghost Mountain. And I connected it. So if you want to watch that after reading this book, very good. Do it. This is about May, who is raised in a Chinese household in Cambodia and the business that he ran with his mother. But then she passes away and he's still trying to run it when he's still just a kid. So he talks about when Khmer Rouge came in, what it's like to starve, what it's like to go through all the horrible things that those people went through. And eventually he became a refugee with parts of his family here and there through Thailand, trying to get in and out, trying to find safety. So it's like every time they were in Cambodia, they're like, let's get out. And then they Thailand, but then it's like not safe there. His family suffered a lot. And his father was like really amazing. This is totally a survival story. Again, there's stuff about labor situations. First, they erased our name. If you don't know about the Rohingya people, they're a minority Burmese group. They're natives that are like really, really old in that area. of Burma or Myanmar, because it's changed like back and forth. So this is about how in his own country, he grew up being called black because he's part of this native group where he's darker, and the struggles of how his people are treated. And they're often put through labor trafficking and sex trafficking. And he was put through slavery in Thailand. And there's a lot of stuff about how the people are murdered. Like they're looked at like they're not important, they're replaceable. No one really cares about them. It is a really amazing and sad story, but it teaches you about a minority group a lot of people don't know and how most all of them are put through slavery, and it's awful. The next three are books that I have reviewed on this channel before. A Cry of the Heart. If you want to know about that story, I would tell you to go watch that video, but if you don't feel like clicking, I'll just briefly mention. This is about Deborah. She was abused as a child and then eventually forced into sex trafficking, and her mother was also in sex trafficking. She grew up in the US, and what it looked like for her to go through all the horrible things she went through and eventually finding Jesus. And she was completely transformed. She helps people now. It is a beautiful story. I really love this. I don't like the cover of it, but I really love this book. And then Nobody's Girl. This is Virginia. Now, she gives her account of what it was like being forced into Jeffrey Epstein's ring, or what that abuse looked like. And this is graphic. She doesn't hold back. She does talk about her abuse as a child as well. It is very raw, very good. So if you're interested in learning more about that, it's a little eye-opening. And then small things like these, even though this is a historical fiction book, it is short, but does talk about a labor trafficking situation for a lot of women who were forced into being maids, and then just other really sad things around it, what young girls had gone through that put them into these facilities. Eventually they had been ignored, not treated well at all, and it's really sad. But it was such a good book. This was one of the best books I read last year. And honestly, I read this in an hour and a half. It is so short and so good. But yes, this does talk about labor trafficking from specifically in the 80s this is set, but it talks about it even in the 60s. So this is about a real place that existed. Whew. All right, so those were all the more modern day accounts. There were so many human trafficking stories that I could have given you that were more historical, like a lot older. So many good ones, but I wanted to focus on these. There were so many as it was. This is probably my longest video ever. So if you watched all of these and learned all about these books, I applaud you. Thank you. Whew, it was hard to do. Again, if you want to know ways that you could help, if you want to maybe connect to my organization, I'll put a link to my organization in the info. We do a lot of fundraising things for different organizations that are doing a lot more, but we also have a lot of partners, and then we work with a lot of prevention. We work with schools. We work with the state of New Jersey. We work with Homeland Security. We work with FBI specialists. We work with safe houses in New Jersey and New York City. So we do a lot of things. If you want to help, please let me know, or I appreciate it so much. Thank you guys once again. Bye.